a small radio next to my bed. And probably I was in the second or third grade of the primary school, and it was the first Gulf War starting in Middle East. And for some very strange reason that stick with me so much that every morning I listen to the news at 7 o'clock. We have to find these platforms not to tell people how or what to think, but how to think, and allow them the liberty then to make their own conclusions, but in a freedom and consciously reassessing the facts ultimately. That's what I enjoy showing people. Well, you make the decision, but these are the facts. I'm not sure how much we talk about that in Brussels, and I'm quite convinced that we should talk about it more, because with 27 different cultures, you certainly need to invest more energy into active listening. So to understand, especially when we are not talking on our mother language, how to really understand what the other party wants to say. Yes, it is definitely killing many of the chances of active listening. Digital illiteracy among young people. You would expect that they are digital aboriginals, and they are not. That was also extremely high.
How would you define that?
Digital illiteracy is when you are not using it for enhancing your capabilities in real life, but maybe you are just Candy Crush Saga. That's when the digital tool is using you, and not you are the one who is using the digital tool.
Welcome to the next edition of Beyond the Bubble, which makes me very happy to have here a friend, fellow Hungarian, Botond, who's a foreign policy analyst, but he also wears many other hats. And those will be the topics we're going to be discussing, because he's very involved with Jesuits, with a leadership program. And all of this comes together in very particular ways. So with that, welcome.
Thank you, Andras. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So before we kick off, let's say, deeper topics, it will be interesting to hear how you got into where you are, and how you got to where you are, and how you got into dealing with foreign policy in the broadest possible sense for several decades by now. And also it will be interesting to hear what the Jesuit Leadership Programme is.
So the more I received this question, where actually my interest in international relations came around, the more I can go back in my lifetime. Because first I was thinking, well, yes, I did international relations in France as a secondary degree at Sciences Po, so very classical. But how did I get there? Why did I apply for a secondary degree? Because my first degree was law. And already during the Faculty of Law back in Budapest, I was always interested in the international subject, in psychology, in criminology, everything that was not properly law.
It resonates with me. Yeah.
Yes, I guess. Yeah. And then further going back, one of my very first memory I recall about international relations is that we just moved with my parents to a new room, to a new flat where I got a room on my own, and I had a small radio next to my bed. And probably I was in the second or third grade of the primary school, and it was the first Gulf War starting in the Middle East. And for some very strange reason that stick with me so much, that every morning I listen to the news at 7 o'clock. And whether Saddam Hussein has launched this or that rockets or what happened. And it is a very vivid memory. And probably it was working in me for whatever reasons that I inherited from my family. My grandfather was fighting in the Second World War. We were living together with him. So I had this privilege to live with my grandparents for a couple of years. And I guess everything just, came together that, well, this is something that I bring from the family. This is something that I lived through. And somehow I must admit that probably this is also working with some family trauma and everything coming together in that way that it turned out in a professional sense that I also wanted to understand it from a scientific perspective.
Looking for the why.
Yeah.
So that put you on a path where you actually launched a foreign policy magazine online.
That was
which year was that?
That was my first and only startup in 2007, so just 1 year before the financial crisis, which at that point seemed a very good idea. That was still before Google completely wiped out the advertisement market. So we had a very different business plan than 1.5 years later. But we carried it on for a few more years. It was in Hungarian to educate the Hungarian readership about foreign policy. And that was the first dedicated niche site of foreign policy of the time.
And I was not just looking for Hungary or Central Europe, but also generally analyzing what's happening and why in the broader world.
Yes, it was offering analysis, not just news. And I happened to live in Brussels at the time when we kicked it off.
Already?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I was
what
working.
What brought you to Brussels already at that time?
I was in the parliament with one of the Hungarian party that doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
So that was the regime-changing party, and I was working with an MEP as an assistant, as I usually call a slave to an MEP. As
slave to an MEP, okay. Some people might take issue with that, others would very much agree. Okay.
That's a beautiful job. So I must say that I learned a lot, and that's a perfect place to begin a Brussels insider's career, because the parliament can look on the commission, can look on the council, unlike from the other two institutions, I guess it's more difficult to get an outlook. So I enjoyed it a lot, and probably that also inspired me. I remember that was the day when we launched, when Yulia Tymoshenko, so the former prime minister of Ukraine of the time, came to visit to the parliament. So that was my first article.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. So you worked in the parliament, and at the same time, you were devouring the news wherever they happened and turn that into analytical pieces.
Yes, so I must also admit that I was in a privileged position, that my MEP, who was alone from his party, and we knew that he would get no continuation as the party disappeared very soon, that he allowed me to work on my own as well. So it was also an agreement, and then I went part-time. And
so basically, he was your intellectual sponsor, that like a startup, right?
Yes. So I
got
must
the funding, and you had the liberty. That's
I must remain grateful to him. Yes.
Very nice. And then what happened?
And then, for some strange reason, I accepted an invitation by the ELTE Budapest University to go back as an assistant professor. Because I was writing my PhD at the time about lobby regulation and comparative analysis of the Brussels regulation to the US Washington regulation.
Okay.
That was my topic of the PhD, and so I went back to the university, but I very soon understood by the third semester that, let's put it that way, the intellectual liberty was not really guaranteed for so many reasons, and that it was not political issue at the time. It was more material, the lack of resources, lack of attention, lack of tutoring. So yes, then I decided to go back to France, and I went back to the Central European campus of Sciences Po in Dijon, in Burgundy, to teach, and then I later went to Berlin for a research academic year in international political economy.
So there's a political economy part, and then there's something we can definitely come back to, the lobby regulation that you have very deep knowledge on, a full PhD between US and Europe, which in and by itself is a very interesting topic.
Oh, yeah.
And then came the political economy.
Okay. Yes. And then I moved back and forth between Brussels. I ended up in Hungary, and I again accepted the challenge. Somehow I like these very non-guaranteed success challenges.
Okay.
when I accepted to become the head of the foreign policy desk of the Hungarian press agency. And so they invited me exactly because of the startup that I had that was entirely dedicated to foreign policy. So it was absolutely inspiring. But at the same time, you know, when you enter more than 100-year-old institution, which is just getting under some political pressure, again, I had to accept reality that it's very nice, but I cannot actually bring my mission around and about. So better not to harass each other with the leadership.
Yeah.
And then I quit. And that was the moment when the Jesuits in Hungary found me. You know that Jesuits are very famous for their higher education throughout the globe. But in Hungary, they had no university. And that's one of the few countries where, after the collapse of the communist regime, they were not re-established their university. So they decided to create a residential college program. So that's a dormitory practically where they have education attached to it. It's sort of a talent management in an informal way.
So it's a bit like campus kind of thing, or what does residential mean in this context?
Yes, that they do live together. It's a dormitory. It's a dorm building with some training rooms and sessions and regular workshops with speakers, academic, seeing them, mentoring. So it's a very informal talent management that all those who apply are free to receive from any university in Budapest. So that's the beauty, that actually we had doctors, we had lawyers, we had engineers sitting in the same seminar, which is quite unusual, I must say. And I love the idea that you can mix the silos already from a scientific
perspective. It's not just the lawyers or the engineers or
no, I couldn't do that. I have never been good at that, to dig very deep for long years. That's not my brain. I had to accept that my brain is just holistically wired. And I guess all our listeners also probably after a couple of decades, we more and more accept and realize how our brain is wired.
No, I think that's really important, because it's my dad actually, I don't know where he got it from, but he did have he had a consulting training business, and one of the big lines that they would always say, that life is not divided into silos, or not divided like a university into faculties, but it kind of all comes together. And I think that sort of approach makes perfect sense.
Yes, and we need both type of people. So we need those who are excelling at silos, and we also need those who are connecting silos. So I'm in the second category, and I'm very happy and at peace with that. And then this college network, actually, Jesuits are present in all the countries in Europe. They call it provinces.
Provinces, okay.
Yes, so practically either a country is one province or maybe more.
So what's Belgium? Belgium is a province?
Belgium is actually two provinces, the French-speaking Southern province together with France, and the northern part of Flanders together with the Netherlands.
Okay.
But that's a recent development. So Hungary was one single province, but still we were working with the neighboring countries, so we established the Central European Jesuit Dormitory College Network from Slovenia to Slovakia to Romania, Transylvania. So that was the beauty. And curiously, there was one single such college building from 50 meters from the main square in Leuven.
Okay.
Because one of the Hungarian escapee or refugee Jesuit established in 56. So upon the revolution that was oppressed by the Soviets, he went to Leuven, established a small residential program, and that is still around in Leuven. So that was also part of our network and still is.
So how did you get into to working with the Belgian Jesuits, or you set
that's
up?
That's a Hungarian outlet. So that's a Hungarian outpost in Belgium. Curiously, yeah. So that's not part of the Belgian province. It is in here in the country, but it's working together with the Hungarians.
I see, because it's close to Square Montgomery in Brussels, where
that's a different thing. Yeah.
Well, that's a different.
That's a different thing. Yes. So that was part of my 2010 professional journey. And in 2019, when I, again, for the third time in my life, moved back to Brussels.
Keep moving back and moving out, okay.
Yes. I guess
hop
on, hop off
yeah.
with Brussels. But that's, I enjoyed all part, this time with my family. And so 19 was the year when we started the so-called European Leadership Programme, which is a Jesuit program for young professionals in Brussels.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who is doing the classical Blue Book traineeship after the College of Europe, or
with the
European Commission or Schumann program in the European Parliament, or working with an NGO or with a corporate, can join for this 5+5 months program that is really designed for, I guess for you this is evident, but it's not really evident for the young generations we receive, for vocational discernment. So what actually you really want to do with your life. It's not about your next job, even your next 5 job, but what actually is the objective that you want to do with your life. And then it's much easier to distill what your next job should be in line with this greater objective.
And this is what the leadership program focuses on.
Yes.
And where does the Jesuit angle come into it? So how much religious or church-related aspects are at play?
Maybe for our listeners, to place where Jesuits are, Pope Francis is a Jesuit. So that's the value system that the church, through this Catholic religious order that are the Jesuits for the last 500 years, do represent. So it is a spiritual program in the larger sense that we accept people who are ready for religious dialogue. But you don't need to be Catholic. We have had Muslims, we have had atheists, we have had Protestants or whatsoever. Of course, a certain part of the program is Catholic. They will meet Jesuits, so they should not get a heart attack. But the point is really that they are ready for dialogue within each other and with mentors who are Jesuit alumni from Jesuit high schools or universities in town at their peak of their career in the institutions. And they also meet sometimes non-priests, fathers, and so on.
Because earlier you mentioned, as we were chatting, the importance of values, and how would you define, if there's any definition at all, of what the foundational values of Jesuits, or perhaps specifically in the leadership program, are?
We use the expression that we want people who are looking for the European common good. So that's the sense of orientation, what makes this program stand apart from other national level or province level Jesuit programs. There are Jesuit universities in Spain, in Italy, even in Germany. So there is a lot that can help to bring people who are interested in the European level of the common good and how to create that. So that's the macro level of the interest. And on the personal level, we really want them to be interested in their values. And that's what we call, and that's actually a very Jesuit word, the discernment. To give yourself time to reflect on that, maybe even daily, and maybe by writing a diary. What happened today? What was in line with what actually I really want to do? Am I distracted? Are there inordinate attachments in my life? Disordered emotions? How much do they really impede on my true wish for my life? So these are questions that, sounds like, you need a canapé and sit, but no, that's exactly the thing that you can make it a daily habit to make this jump between these levels. And I guess that's the interesting thing.
I think this is extremely important. I'm just wondering that someone who's in their, say, late 20s or mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s, how aware are they that this is what they're going to get?
When did you become aware of this need in yourself?
I'd say 7 years ago,
which
is probably quite late in some sense.
Never too
Though
late.
when I say, okay, late, there's a certain judgment there that, okay, there's a good time to have that. Or a good time is probably get it from early on from your background or elsewhere. But the late, when I say, is like, I wish I had been aware of that earlier. You know that there's a saying with, I think it's David Foster Wallace, I think, and the old fish meets the young fish and asks the young fish, how's the water? And the young fish says, what water?
Oh yeah.
Right? That's the thing with, because values are just very difficult to see because they are intangible, they are manifest only through our actions, through our words, through our coexistence. So you need to extract it. You need to see based on the dynamics that you observe and your very own behavior, your very own actions, and you say, oh, well, I did this. That didn't make me feel good, probably because there's a mismatch between what I consider, at least intellectually, valuable versus how I acted. And there's a conflict there.
But that's great when you realize that, and that's great when you can act upon that later, or when you can maybe even go on a correctional action in following up on that decision.
Do you encourage? So how do you get the participants to realize what their values are, what the values that you want to instill in them, or encourage them to instill or endorse? So how do you get them to see those?
Actually, there is, of course, no magic bullet. So the thing is that the Jesuit educational tradition is also talking a lot about personal attention. so that you cannot give really a unified standard off-the-shelf thing. And that's why the program is very small. So we only have 20 people in one semester. And they all receive a mentor and the coach separately, one-on-one.
So every participant has a mentor.
Yeah.
I know one of the mentors, which you both know. Good friend of ours.
Exactly. So that's in every life stage with different family socializations, with a different academic results and paths that they all went through. Of course, they would arrive to different results and wishes and desires regarding this. So this must be a conversation. And these conversations, every week there is a group conversation, but then they also drive their conversations between them. That's why it's residential. And I believe it's very important that it's residential. And that's one of the very highest positive feedback we always get from each cohort. And we are working with the 14th cohort now. The 14th. That they really appreciate that they are put together with like-minded people who are interested in something greater than themselves. And I guess that's the calling point. That because now we have been explaining what that is for 20 minutes, so it's very difficult to explain that until you really get it experienced. Yeah. So for them, what they see is that they will get into a community that is composed of similar-minded people, and that's very attractive. Unlike in any COT in Brussels or Wohngemeinschaft or you name it, when it's not the case usually.
Yeah, because they're I don't know what the uniting principle there. Maybe it's their financial situation, maybe it's where they study, or just location. But here, broadly, that there's at least a baseline understanding or a baseline shared purpose that they are aiming towards, even if they come from very different backgrounds.
Yes, exactly. And maybe we are providing the inputs. It's not an academic program. It is a formation, as we call it. So we provide inputs, but they have to work with that. And that's something I always explain at the inauguration day, that we provide you guys with the tools, but it's up to you what you craft.
So try to be more specific. I'm curious, what exactly is that they discuss or the kind of things that they do? Because, I mean, it sounds super philosophical and you can have amazing intellectual debates, but how does that translate into their everyday experience?
So first of all, we already share a diary with each of them so they can take notes. We provide them with a template of a daily examen, how to go through at the end of your day.
Self-reflection.
Yes, a self-reflection, a daily self-reflection, template questions. They go on a retreat in the very beginning. And I guess the major instrument is a so-called personal mission plan that they are supposed to write over the 5 months period of the program. Also discussing with their mentors, with their coach, and answering specific questions on, what actually is, how can I put together my life mission? What that is for me? And at the very end, they present it in front of each other and the mentors.
Can
and
you
the
share
coaches.
An example or something that stuck with you?
I mean, sometimes it's extremely emotional. So people really allow vulnerabilities to surface, and that's very touching in the way, because that shows the level of trust that they have in each other and us. So I feel a great respect in all those cases. Sometimes sometimes you see that people change their mind. So they come to Brussels. Yeah, Brussels is a good place. I will earn money and enjoy the EU mindset. And they realize that it's not their piece of cake, because they are honest and they understand that the Commission is more than 30,000 people. It's a huge administration after all. That's not my mindset. So they maybe go back to the national capital, or maybe they go rather to an NGO. And I really love when between 25 and 30 something early, I was not always able. Just like you, it's not evident that you are able to make those decisions to shift career.
Yeah, I'm just thinking how deep that introspection can go at that age, because there are a lot you can realize, and things that that can have a major impact on the path you're going to take afterwards. I just don't know how much we, and I say that in general, can do in that age bracket.
No, what we claim is to give them a toolbox. And we give this toolbox, and whether they use it already during the program, which is the hope, but the hypothesis is that they will use in the rest of their lifetime. So that's why it's a formation. It's not just purely an education and whatever happens, and then you get the credits and you are off. It's a formation that provides you with a lifetime toolbox. And maybe you will, and I have had those discussions when alumni came back to Brussels and we had a coffee. And they said that, Botond, I just understood it after 3 years that message, what I received from this and this speaker did resonate with me now. So this is also something I love, that people can rely on the experience much later, or maybe the life moment that can define the interpretation of an earlier experience is just, popping up much later. I guess we all had that experience, right? Yeah. That, what my father said when I was 15. So that kind of...
Never happens, right? Oh, well, Dad actually said something that made sense.
Maybe he was right.
Maybe it only took me 20 years to realize, but yeah, there was something to it. Yeah. But having said that, at the same time, we do get a lot of messages, be that from parents or anyone close to us in any setting, romantic or other. You do get a lot of unhelpful advice as well.
Yes.
So those are the ones, that's the wheat from the chaff, where you say, okay, so which one makes perfect sense and which one is the one it's better to let it go?
I try to highlight that they really need to make consciously some decisions on these discernments. Because I was also growing up, as I said, with my grandfather, who was fighting against the Soviets in the 40s. And that was life-defining for him.
Well, there's a job for him again, so.
Unfortunately, yes, that's what I showed my kids, that you see, in our family, each generation has had their battles with the Russians.
With the Soviets.
With the Soviets.
Well,
yeah, that was just a tag. But so when retrospectively I see his messaging, it's absolutely organic to his life, upon which I will accept some parts for the rest of my life, but not all, because I understand what was his own personal takeaway, which with many I can agree, some I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I guess we all have this homework to do, to see how our family socialization defined us for the worse and the better, with the transgenerational trauma and the rest.
Yeah.
So we have to work with that. We have to work with the university. I went to a French Sciences Po, as I said, and well, I guess the listeners will know even better than we do what sort of prejudices are attached to the Sciences Po elite. Of course, I had a Marxist teacher, which as a Hungarian was extremely shocking at first. As in Hungary, behind the Iron Curtain, we had a very different perception of what Marxism is.
Well, more than perception.
More than perception, real life experience. My family's real estate being taken away, people being put on the watch list of the secret police. Yes, so we had a very different experience. And then you meet the professor who is talking about the philosophical Marxism in a very positive way. At first, distance, and then, okay, so what is the thing that actually makes him say that? And what is the value that he sees behind that? And maybe that's the sticker that he put on it, Marxism, but there is the equality desire. There is the desire of making capitalism more equal, which is a fair claim, right? So finally, you can make the effort to understand what is the real message behind.
That's quite an experience, I guess.
Yes. So I really love these discoveries. My mother was an orienteering world champion. And she was a world champion in orienteering in 1972.
Orienteering.
The running, when you run with a map and a compass in the forest.
Okay.
And you have to find different.
I didn't know that was the name, orienteering.
Yes, that's the official
so like
English
cross
name.
Country.
Cross country with a map.
With a map, okay.
Yes,
okay.
yes. And the quicker you check in with the points, put out in the
that's
forest.
where it's coming from.
Yes.
You do the same, just in a different way.
Yes, exactly. So I guess
your traveling, and sometimes literally and sometimes intellectually cross country or across the world.
Intellectual orienteering.
Exactly.
So that's what I wanted to say. That probably I also inherited this, and I have to accept my inheritance in that regard, my intellectual inheritance. Finally, I did athleticism, so I never went into orienteering. Probably that's difficult for kids to choose. Would have chosen the same path. That would have not been evident for me.
Well, you did in a way, but we're gonna get to that in short order. But I think this whole topic around trying to orient the young generation or junior professionals or those.
I guess excuse me, but there is a very important difference. I'm not pushing my values on them. What I do is to give them the toolbox to discover their own values. And they might come to a conclusion that it's just partly overlapping with what actually I represent as a person. And that's still okay. In the way that, of course, I wouldn't take certain extremism inside the program. But still, it's absolutely okay if, whatever, they don't go to church every Sunday. That's not the issue. Where we have to understand each other is around the European common good and accepting the social good necessities.
I'm assuming because one of the core values is respect, and the whole concept of respect, I think it is worth spending a moment or two on, because certainly you do respect them individually and their worldview and their opinions. So that is basically the antithesis of pushing your doctrines or your values on them. And yet, respect doesn't mean unbounded, complete, anything goes kind of approach. So respect is a very difficult thing. Also, you and your kids, so us as parents, to what degree? Obviously, I respect my child's bodily autonomy. I respect my child's certain wishes, but it doesn't mean I'm just gonna say, "Hey, kid, do whatever." Out of respect. Well, that would actually be the opposite of respect. So how do you see just the whole notion of respect, especially in that context where you say, okay, we do take in others of different faith, different worldviews, and yet, obviously, we're not going to take in someone who has very extreme or very intolerant views around the world.
But that's what I call the openness expectations, or the readiness for dialogue. That not exclusion is your objective. And what is a chagrin is that I really see a couple of programs doing that, where you have a strong ideological push to the young generation. And we all know it's easy, especially when still hormones are working, and to put them in an intellectual trap, or to disorient them in a way. And that is sometimes it is requiring less of an investment of your energy from the fellows' side. So from the young people, sometimes they find it easier not to really do their homework of discovering the values and making their own decisions. So getting a ready plate is easier, of course.
Yeah,
but
if you spoon feed them, here's what you need to think, here's how you need to think about things. It's a very lazy, easy position. Because if I'm given ready-made, obviously it gives me much less autonomy, but it's just easier for me. If you feed it to me, well, okay, I'll take it.
Yes, and I guess we have all met those people at our universities during our academic careers who were in that path, and I just don't want to go on that. I guess our age is not really about that, or shouldn't be about that.
So how do you see that coming together with the whole notion of leadership?
We have a lot of debate about the use of this word, to be honest. We didn't want to put something much more particular to dissuade applications. Already running a Jesuit program in Brussels, I guess a faith-based program is something pretty unique. So when we talk about leadership, usually what we really push is self-leadership. So first understand yourself. And then, at the age of 25 to 30 something, understand yourself. And then, if you are credible in the eyes of the people, if you might be doing your homework in your self-discovery, then you can become any leader you want. If you want to become a leader, maybe you understand as a self-leader that it's not your thing to stand out and make an electoral political career. And that's also fair.
Are you sure not in a Buddhist establishment? This is Jesuit?
There has been co-inspiration, that the Jesuits have been all around in Asia in the earlier centuries, and their buzzword was actually inculturation. So while certain religious orders did, let's put it that way, a more formal touch, so they tried to push the local population in a newly built church, the Jesuits were the ones who were learning the language of the locals, who were taking the meals with the locals, and sometimes we joke that they were taking the opiums with the Chinese. So to understand what their system of values is, and to see how that can come together. And there is no issue if an Indian Jesuit is dancing in a church half naked and praying to God like that. It's absolutely okay. There is no one single way. So this inculturation is very deeply ingrained in the approach of the Jesuit education as well, and that's a global thing. So that was probably one of the first truly global educational approach.
That question fascinates me because it's such a fundamental question in every. I wouldn't use the term ideology. That's a little pejorative, but rather in religious or even perhaps even spiritual beliefs, but rather religious settings, as to what degree do you adapt yourself to the local community, environment, habits, and everything else, and to what degree you don't. Because if you blend in too much, it's a little bit like an ambassador. Like you're sent to an ambassador, there's good reason why you have a 4-year mandate and not more, say for certain exceptions, because the whole idea is that you need to stay outside of it while being part of it. So it's a very difficult balance to say, hey, the Jesuits in India, they do what they do, and yet they shouldn't give themselves up, and the very reason they went there, because then they're no longer what they were supposed to be.
Well, you can certainly invite also a Jesuit on your podcast, but what I see as a layperson working with them for more than a decade is that when I talk about our leadership program in Brussels, and I visited several different leadership programs in the US, without having met before, we are running on the same principles.
Right.
So it is. So Saint Ignatius, who founded the order 500 years ago, was sort of a call center. So he sent the missionaries abroad to very different places, and what remains is tons of letters. So they were not left alone. They were always really strongly connected to the center, and I guess that's why we perceive the Jesuits as a hierarchical organization. But the point is what you say, to keep this thin red line, not to blend in too much, but to avoid the unnecessary cultural clash, because inculturation does help. I mean, the first dictionary that was written between Chinese and Latin was written by a Jesuit, not by accident, because they did understand what is happening.
Yeah, so it's basically having a very deep understanding of your partners, or dare I say target audience, if I were looking at it from a marketing perspective.
Yes, in that.
But again, without you becoming part of your group,
which has a very long tradition of active listening. So I'm not sure how much we talk about that in Brussels, and I'm quite convinced that we should talk about it more, because with 27 different cultures, you certainly need to invest more energy into active listening. So to understand, especially when we are not talking on our mother language, how to really understand what the other party wants to say.
Do you think that's lacking a little bit here?
I feel that the environment, with this time pressure, with the political pressure and the rest, and the personal agenda, institutional agenda, political agenda, all together on one person in one negotiation situation, yes, it is definitely killing many of the chances of active listening.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think that there are just so many layers to it. And like you say, where there's high stakes, and now with challenges with the U.S., challenges with Middle East, with China, with so many other parts of the world, very timely and huge pressure. You don't necessarily think about, okay, so what cultural background is that person coming from? What ideas or presumptions they have before they sit here, and what filter does the language we're using apply on top of everything else? And I think it's, at least, like you say, like just maybe 30 seconds of self-awareness and reflection to say, okay, who am I actually speaking with? It's not just an EU official, it's not just a politician, but someone with so many layers to their identity and their cultural background.
Exactly, and besides the current business card, there is still decades of other socialization and culturation that comes with the package. That we often ignore. And I, as a Hungarian in Brussels, I also feel that, or Central Europeans. But even if I talk to non-funding member states representatives, I often get this feedback after maybe a bottle of beer that yes, they don't understand us, and they means the other side. Often in Central Europe, we talk about the Western Europeans like that. It's not necessarily the case, but often that yes, it's difficult to understand local realities, especially with our small languages in Central Europe. But when I was living in Berlin, it was difficult, even for me, to get the right sense of East Berlin, West Berlin. Those cultural tensions under the current. Dijon, that is a very bourgeois city, or Bordeaux, where I was living. I mean, you really need years. Now that I have been living in Belgium for 6 years, I start to see where I need to invest more to understand.
Yeah, but again, you say Belgium, but there are two very different sociological parts to it. And again, not in Belgium as the Flemish and the Wallonian and Brussels, but the EU circle, which is located in Belgium, but this is inhabited by 27 and far more, I would say like 100 plus nations and cultures and everything else in that particular political business setting. And then there is Belgium as a country, which again has its own quirks that you need to figure out. But I want to come back for a second to something you mentioned a few times already, which is the European, how do you phrase
Common
it?
good?
The European common good. And that's a very, let's say, a term subject to a lot of interpretation. So what is your interpretation of the European common good?
So what is the Jesuit value behind is reconciliation. And reconciliation can happen between people, between individuals, between institutions, between so many levels. And that's what the Society of Jesus, as the Jesuits are called officially, that's what they actually see in this program as well, how we can enhance or help or support these reconciliatory processes that is inside Europe. And I mean, we often mention that it's a peace project, very successful, but we also often forget it. The Jesuits don't, because for them 50 years or 70 years is short term, you know. So they have been here before the EU, and reconciliation have been very important for them. Also because the Jesuits were abolished. So there was a period of more than a decade when they were abolished because of the kings and the current pope at the time decided so. So they have an experience of going underground. And actually the only country where they were not abolished was Russia. So the legal survival of the order was through one of the Russian emperor. So history can be also a teacher. And when I look at the Jesuits from a sociological, organizational history perspective, you know, they probably went through everything that the EU will go through in the next 100 years. Let's hope.
Right. But reconciliation means that there was a conciliation at one point, right? Like, how do you, that there was some sort of coexistence in European history, which for a large part of European history was not really the case. So reconciliation as in the peaceful coexistence of European nations, or between different social, societal layers, or even with our neighbors, because now you look at the war in Ukraine, it's everything but. So how do you see this?
One of the largest projects that the Jesuits are also doing in Brussels is the Future Generation Initiative. So they want to talk about how rights of the future generations are represented in the EU legislation. That's very applied, right? But that's also reconciliation rooted. How can we talk about equality of generations? How can we talk about equality of religions? Pope Francis has made some steps in that regards to other world religions. So that has so many layers, and you just have to discern where your personal occasion to work for that lies. And for us, this is also bringing together these 20 people in each semester from the four corners of Europe, sometimes together with someone from even from the US or Africa. And that's a very small input, but we have to be humble to accept that, well, that's what at this point we can deliver.
I appreciate the whole approach that you say, well, 20 people, that's really not a lot, but it can still make a difference, and it can still positively contribute to a very lofty goal of reconciliation and just a better Europe, ultimately.
That's the hope. And I guess we have to invest 30 years in this program. And that's something that would not shock a Jesuit leader to listen, to hear that argument that, okay, but we have to run it for 30 years. Okay. So, you know, when you have this business plan for 30 years, who would accept that, right? So for that, I really appreciate
playing the long game. Yeah.
Yes, that's a long game, exactly. And I guess I'm tempted by the long game perspective.
Yes. You know, you asked me when did I realize certain of these life wisdoms, and I think understanding that you can, and in almost all cases should, play the long game. Meaning, don't try to do a business just with the aim of making a quick buck in 2 weeks. Don't read a book because it's immediately going to pay off in a month in your business or in your personal life. It stacks, right? Like you build up certain amount of knowledge and understanding about the world and perhaps wisdom.
But do you think
that's the long game?
Do you think we really? So is it still actual to repeat this message, or are people on a learning curve that is steep in that regard? In Brussels, let's restrain it to Brussels.
I think it's hard to take it. I'm just thinking which direction to take it from, because from an individual perspective, I think, and again, this is no judgment on people in Brussels. Just generally, it takes a lot of life experience and often hardship until you understand that things eventually pan out, things eventually work out. But again, don't rush it, and understanding that over time you're going to get the right perspective. It's going to work out, but don't rush it. And that can be, if you want to be super strong, don't go to the gym 6 times a week for 3 months and hope you're going to get a quick result until you get an injury, and then for 1 year you need to stay home, right? Like, again, finding the right balance between being dynamic and ambitious and all of that, but not rushing things. And I think not rushing things is the long game.
And conversations also on its time. And what I usually say, that democracy also takes a lot of time. And we just have to respect this need, that we have to give this time. And we are not an autocracy that Xi Jinping presses the button and then the local population knows how to abide. So that's the price of the freedom of thought and the debates and the rest that we otherwise may enjoy anyway. But it comes with certain price.
Constraints. Yeah.
Constraints.
Yes. I agree with you. And now we're a little bit shifting toward the foreign policy hat of yours, where indeed the democracy versus autocracy, and obviously it has a lot to do with everything we covered so far, is autocracies are very efficient. Not necessarily in a long game sense, because you can very quickly, you say, well, let's build a dam or destroy that forest or create a factory, or let's pull in certain investment of whatever new gadget. Yeah, that can be very, very quick, but it's not necessarily the long game. Is it in the long-term interest of the country? Is it in the long-term is it going to pay off, or its societal impact? So if you rush those decisions and rush those conversations, you often don't have the best results. Often on the contrary. How do you think about this?
I guess that's, of course, they are the most efficient in controlling the population. So that's the first and foremost. If you look at the Chinese Communist Party, that's quite evident that they wipe out hundreds of billions from the stock exchange when that's necessary, because the leadership is afraid of big data companies or successful companies, all in all.
Alibaba.
Yes. Yes, I mean, can you imagine that the CEO of Alibaba has been taken away, and we just didn't knew where he was, and so that's quite unthinkable in our region of the world. And I don't know how many of us really want to live that dream that you can be taken off from the street, which is kind of the new debate in the U.S. With the Abrego Garcia case, who was taken to El Salvador prison. But that's let put that away. So yes, control of the population, and secondary. For example, I'm quite tired of the argument that the Chinese were so efficient battling COVID, because when you look at their vaccine, that was not efficient. It has been proven over and over again. So yes, they could command the population to stay at home. Yes, that was efficient. That's population control. But the innovation was not there. It was partly a Hungarian lady who escaped from the Hungarian academic stifling environment to the US and to discover the mRNA vaccine that finally did beat COVID, which was out of the democratic society's achievements book.
But that's the, I would say, eternal debate, but I think this is the 21st century debate, is autocracies / dictatorships. And we don't go as far as dictatorships. Let's you just take autocracies which really have a massive top-down and no open debate allowing systems versus democracies. And then comes the other end, because the democracies, we're sitting here in Brussels, the EU is so often criticized that it's extremely slow, it's extremely bureaucratic, it's just not efficient. And even what's also thrown at it, that it's not even democratic. So if you pay all the price of inefficiency, at least be democratic. But I do think the EU is democratic, given the extreme complexity of the interplay between the member states and federal / confederal system that there is. So within all those constraints and variables, I think it does a great job at being democratic. I might get heat for that, but I do think so. Obviously, it can be improved so much. So again, here's the democratic, yet inefficient, or to varying degree inefficient. And then there's the autocratic, which is super efficient, but often for the totally wrong reasons or the totally wrong objectives. So how do you see, where's the golden middle in that? Is it even a fair dichotomy?
No, and I guess I wanted to get to that point, that if we use this narrative, that might be partly already giving in to the autocracies, because that's not the right narrative or not the right framing of this problem. And that's why we rely on the notion of the European common good, because common good does imply and requires you to look at the well-being of the individuals. And without that, you are serving the Chinese Communist Party's interest, Vladimir Putin's regime's interest, or the theocratic interest of Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, which, yes, can be efficient. Yes, they are efficient autocratic leaders from their perspective, but that's not for the good of the population. There is no common good in that. In China, I know that we can have this debate and how many people were lifted out from poverty, but how many more could have been lifted out? That's the question. Or how more equal richness could have been made in the last 15 years. So we really have to be careful how we crave out this narrative. And still, who wants to move out from Europe? I mean, most of us really love to live here, right? So Europe is I would say, the happiest part of the globe. From many, many perspectives, with all the challenges we have. And I guess since the inauguration of Donald Trump, this has a new optic again, what we can appreciate with social security and the rest. And well, in Brussels, we also appreciate the right to demonstrate. So that's something that we all have to add to it, besides the so-called efficiency debate.
I think that whole idea of well-being, or I like to use the word flourishing, perhaps individual flourishing, but societal flourishing. And then again, we could put a dichotomy between societal well-being versus individual well-being. It's a very important and delicate balance. But when you look at it as in its complexity, because I would say, well, if I were to start an innovative company right now, probably the US is a good place. Well, again, with a lot of variables these days, given the way things are. But again, in terms of a business environment, it's a pretty good one, and you can get venture capital, and there's a lot you can get. But again, you look at the broader picture and say, okay, where do I want my kids to grow up, and do they want to be trained in dodging school shooters versus enjoying a relatively secure environment in most parts of Europe? So,
and how can we talk about electoral equality when practically, since the decision of the Supreme Court in the United States, you can pour money uncounted into political campaigns? I mean, think about that for a second as a European. And I guess we see the Le Pen debate in a very different perspective, that you can misuse public funds and you can get, and she was not alone in France, plenty of other politicians got carried away by that. And the US is, yes, mostly business-oriented environment, I would say, which businessmen will appreciate, but where is the common good?
Yeah, and I think that's a really fundamental conversation, and this is an amazing momentum for Europe, because I agree with you. Europe is an unbelievably good place to live in, with enormous red flags, with enormous challenges, with enormous issues already on so many levels, in terms of demographic pressure, in terms of, again, efficiency issues. There are so many things. But if you draw that, I don't know what's the official name of that, this kind of spider web graph, with this chart where it's not like a one or two metric, but you take 8, 10 or different metrics. Generally, and I'd say specifically Belgium generally is not great at anything, but it's amazing on so many things. So in aggregate, it's a great place to live, because if you take social security, you take schooling, you take just generally green environments, you take
bicycle lanes,
kind of work-life balance. There are so many other metrics you can look at. It's very good at many of those. So in aggregate, it makes it a good place to be. And there are a lot of places where you can have sunny beaches, but perhaps not a lot of educational facilities. You could have, again, take the US, amazing business opportunities, but then you have great problems in downtowns or inner cities, and crime.
Then you pay $4,000 for kindergarten a month.
Kindergarten, or for healthcare, right? Like, so what are basically your values ultimately, but what's important to you on aggregate in your current circumstance? And then you really zoom out and say, okay, on a societal/continental level, where does that make sense?
Yes, and I guess this is a very European take on social responsibility in the classical sense of this expression, that yes, we are ready to pay these high taxes to allow a
I'm not so happy about it, but
none of us is really happy, I guess, and that's also
no, but that's again,
it's not about happiness, I guess.
It's not about happiness, and certainly there could be better ways to both to optimize the tax part and also what it's being spent on. Of course, that's a separate debate, but overall,
the principle of solidarity, and I guess solidarity would be very close in the value pyramid to reconciliation. So that's something that is quite European in so many perspectives, that we feel that when you look at the international aid figure that used to be, Europe has been on top of it as a spender, or our desire to really assist foreign nations in certain stuff and not interfere in other ways, which by now is having real political challenges, yes. So we also need to rethink that. But that's the security perspective entering into the solidarity debate. Yeah, so many questions.
Yeah, but let me just come back to this whole notion of solidarity, because I think solidarity does require a feeling of commonality. So who do I feel, dare I say deserve, maybe that's a strong word, but to say who do I feel that commonality with, the shared worldview, identity, or anything else, that I consider that morally justified to give money to, or spend money on, or allocate funds on.
And I guess this is where the political debate is in the 21st century, right? That the MAGA movement sees solidarity among MAGA movement members, good Americans. Viktor Orbán would see Hungarians, defining on his own terms, without migration, whatever that means, in the 21st century. Or the global church, Pope Francis, who is a descendant of an Italian from Argentine, sees a much more global solidarity necessarily from his point of view. That's the default setting. So you are right pointing out that the substance or the content of the word solidarity, with whom actually I feel my community valid or validated, or where I can vindicate that community, is changing a lot these days. And I guess we also see that in the votership of the extreme forces, that they see the border of solidarity very differently with Ukraine or without Ukraine. And that's I guess the current debate: are we solidary with Ukrainians or not? And then all the political narrative coming on it: is it expensive or not? Whatever. But ultimately, there is a nation being aggressed by another nation. So are we going to show some solidarity or not?
Yeah, I think that's indeed the crux of the matter, where solidarity is right next to identity, and then comes the whole topic of who we are, who we want to be, who we consider as next of kin, or someone who has that shared identity with us. And again, identity, whether that's a religious, that's ethnic, that's cultural, that's value-based, that's political, that there are so many facets to it.
And how exclusive the identity is. I guess that's the curve that we have to look at, and where I guess we see more and more identities with more exclusive forces involved, and that's the threat of political violence ultimately that is coming with it.
So how do you see that shaping? Let's just stick to Europe for now. But how do you see that shaping European politics and ultimately policies?
That's a huge question. Where to begin with? So when you look at the profile of the, let's say, populist voters, so who are, and I am using this word in a completely neutral sense, anti-elitist, so they are against the old elite or whatever elite that they perceive as elite, and often they are anti-pluralist. So they don't accept that the others have the same say in the public things. So that's, in my eyes, that is the unifying definitional element of the populist resistance. So they felt excluded, and when you feel excluded, of course, there is a reaction. And whether that exclusion came from the results of the globalization not being distributed equally, we have all these debates around. But ultimately, there was this perception ridden by Donald Trump, by Marine Le Pen, by many others. Successfully. Now, if these forces get some responsibility, and whether that would tame them is a good question that we have seen in Finland, that the true Finn party has been ultimately divided into a more extreme and a more government-friendly part. So there are...
like in Italy, no?
Or like in Italy, yes, with George Meloni, yes, that's correct. So I guess it's... The good news is that it's not... there is no destiny yet that, fascism will come and take Europe. No, it's still in our hands. And I guess that's an empowering message to see that these developments took really different paths in different countries. So we can still maîtriser, we can still master this process and talk to people and have these conversations. And that's what Pope Francis says. Go out and have the encounters. Just surprise yourself with some discussions. The first time I met with a person was last year who who went and joined the siege of the Capitol Hill in 2021. And it was a hugely revealing discussion. What was her motivation to be there? How she perceived the unfolding of the events. Not that we agreed at the end of the discussion.
So
but
the January 6th.
Yes, the January 6th Capitol riot, which is probably officially not a riot anymore.
Right. That's already shows where you stand, right? If you say it's a riot versus
yes,
uprising versus popular protest, or
I mean, there was violence, so violence is not acceptable. So that's I enjoy also these conversations personally, and when I also see, in Hungary, I had the chance to talk to very different people in Slovakia, where my wife is from, or in Brussels, definitely. In Brussels, you also get all these variative peoples.
Yeah, but perhaps Brussels, that's another criticism against the political side of Brussels. And again, not as the Belgian capital, but as the EU capital.
But I am also 50% living it as a Belgian capital. So I am having local neighbors, kids going to local schools, as I'm not a bureaucrat. So I am happy to live this
so you
Belgian
have
aspect.
that angle as well. But what I was going to say is so here that's a common criticism to say, well, there's this groupthink and there's this, I wouldn't say a drain a swamp idea, but there is a certain idea that goes around in town, and it excludes some of those views. But again, that's where we immediately get to. Some of those views are just full pro-Putinist narratives, and that is where I draw the line. And I say, well, that's a no. And you can definitely, and perhaps you should, have certain conversations, understand where that's coming from, but it's just so often coming from bad faith arguments. So it's not that many people don't genuinely think the way they do because of the way, through their self-discovery, through their own inner political path, they came to that. But there's just bad faith, hidden agendas, and very manipulative ways of trying to shape things.
Yeah, Andras, you have been working in this business more than I did. How interests are actually articulated on individual and then on an aggregated level. And I guess we have an issue with that because when you say that, yes, third country hostile actors, Russians, Chinese, whomever else, are pushing narratives that are successfully taking roots, that means that actually a significant part of the European population accepts interests that are actually not theirs and even going against their own interests. So the recognition of our own interest would be the first thing that we should teach in school. Tax-wise, what is the party really saying and doing? Whether they would respect the school of your district or not, whether they would, these are mundane things that I believe that a voter has to assess upon making the choice, and we cannot expect people to spend hours and hours on that. But we can expect voters to invest in the recognition and the articulation of their very own interest.
I agree with that.
And that's just usually, my shock is always when I hear people talking against themselves. These are the conversations where you really have to be careful, because usually these false arguments do become a part of identity. And I guess that's not particular to the 21st century, but it's very strengthened by the social media context and the echo rooms. And that's where it really gets tough to disentangle beliefs, conspiracies, and narratives coming from hostile actors in one head.
And at the same time, try not to be part of the elite who patronizes the voters, and you basically tell them what they're supposed to think instead of letting them find it out themselves, do their own research. But again, that is definitely massively distorted by the algorithms, which are themselves part of massive manipulative, I wouldn't say tactics, but these are strategies that are put in place. So it's a very complex thing where you do realize that certain voters and just generally large segments of society are so exposed and so influenced by narratives ultimately that do go against themselves, the society, and the European prosperity at large.
Yes. So once we had a project where we invited parents of kids in schools to talk to the teachers, because we found that the ultimate and only platform where they might agree, disregarding the political differences, is the future of their kids. So the teacher and the parent, we all know, and I hope that in many Western schools this system still works, but in Hungary, in these smaller towns, that was not the case. So because we want our kids to flourish, right? That's something, at least, that is not yet questioned, thanks God. So if we want the kids to flourish, what is the environment? Actually, do I really want that the mayor is driving all the corruption in the city and that, my kid can join the corruption? That's a good idea. I guess that's not what you would hear from a parent, right?
I dare to hope so, yeah.
So we have to find these platforms not to tell people how or what to think, but how to think, and allow them the liberty then to make their own conclusions, but in a freedom and consciously reassessing the facts ultimately. So that's what I enjoy showing people. Well, you make the decision, but these are the facts. And sometimes I get a very good vibe and resonance. Oh, well, but no one ever told us the numbers behind the Ukraine support schemes. That, many of them are not grants, but credits. That actually we spent all the rearmament money on ourselves, and we just gave the old equipment to the Ukrainians.
If you take Ukraine, for instance, so do you think that to a large degree, I wouldn't necessarily say debate, because I think for the largest part of Europe, it's not really a debate, because we understand, and especially the closer you are to the Ukrainian border, the more you understand. Well, then there is Hungary, which is a pretty peculiar case at this point, given the propaganda that's so prevalent there. But you take that, for instance, is it ultimately a narrative, a communication problem, a political messaging problem, or it's far more layered than that, as to how people think about the Russia's war against Ukraine?
So I just saw this great quote that the Baltic see war, the Polish see smoke, and all the other nations don't see anything. So, which is not true to, and not just to Romanians. And we can have a debate which country is having what type of perception, but that's actually a solidarity debate, right? And that why would the Spanish invest in it? And that's what also the Swedes or the Lithuanians have to understand, why the Spanish wants to invest in Africa. So to accept each other's immediate security needs and understand that we cannot go without the other one into this road. And that shows, for me, that's just demonstrating the fragmentation of Europe, which is a natural. We are not yet at that level of integration, and that's natural. So we can drive some processes, but it's not there yet. I remember from the 2010s, all the debates we had in the academia when I was still active in that field about European identity. Still non-existent, I guess. So it's part of your identity. Maybe it's even a wrong perception to say that we would have European identity. If you go to the US, they first have Californian and Texan or whichever identity, and then, yes, there is the nation. So the expectation management, but also so we are in the same boat feeling. And maybe with the US turn that we see now, this feeling will be reinforced. But we were expecting that upon the financial crisis, upon the migration crisis, upon COVID, and upon the war. So we have to be realistic.
Yeah. What makes me think is that whole idea of the whole notion of European identity, and when I was teaching EU so many times, I would say, well, the European Commission's number one mandate is to represent European interest, but nobody actually knows what's a European interest. And well, the European interest is what typically the 27 European leaders would decide as such in their conclusions or in their decision, and that's what's considered European interest in that particular moment in time. But going back to your point as to...
But that's the same issue with the national interest. We had this section that what is national interest? What the party decides, what the elite decides. National interest is not 100% national. It has never been.
Yeah. I think going back to your point, I think any kind of interest is mindful of the future generations. I probably wouldn't phrase it that way if it were only up to me. I just say the strategic interest. And strategic interest, especially on a country level, again, that there's an individual flourishing, and that could be life expectancy, that could be literacy, that could be many other individual metrics. But on a country level, it's a certain kind of competitiveness of staying alive, of
survival,
thriving
ultimately,
in a global economy in so many ways. So let's say if a country invests in I don't know, battery factories, wink wink, you know which country I'm talking about, or it invests in non-competitive companies or businesses, let's say because of corruption, or the education system is totally backward and doesn't even enable literacy among the young generation, that is probably not a strategic interest and not the future generation's interest. So it's against the national interest.
Yes, for any elite, actually. And that's, again, the strange thing, that the elite itself is also able to go against its own long-term interests upon acting on short-term returns. And when you look at the figures of functional alpha illiterates in Central Europe, I was looking at the numbers of
functional illiterates, so basically who practically can read, but they don't really understand.
They don't, yes,
what they're reading.
So they cannot put together the contextual meaning of the text. And that was huge. I mean, it's really in the 30-40%, and in some cases, the young generations are even worse. And surprisingly, and even more shockingly, I remember that was the data from Romania because I had some country research on Romania, the digital illiteracy among young people. You would expect that they are digital aboriginals, and they are not. That was also extremely high.
How would you define that?
Digital illiteracy is when you are not using it for enhancing your capabilities in real life, but maybe you are just Candy Crush Saga.
You're scrolling. This
scrolling.
is digital literacy.
And watching videos on a Chinese platform. Yeah. So
right.
that's when the digital tool is using you, and not you are the one who is using the digital tool. When you are, the attention economy is just seeing in you one more customer. And that's, these are huge red flags and warning signs. And I have just begin to watch Adolescence on Netflix, and I guess that's hugely educative because, yes, it's difficult. And that's one of my personal attachments to formation and education is also to keep in touch with the youth and to see what they are interested in and how they interpret the world and how that perception in them is really shaped by these new environments or contexts.
I have a very strong sense that Europe, and I say that pretty broadly, so most European countries, I do accept from this Ukraine because it's been attacked, so it was such a shock to have a war in Europe. But I'm saying, by and large, most European countries have been extremely naive in the past decade or decades as to end of history, democracy is thriving, life is good. But there are a lot of forces, external forces, whose core interest is to weaken any kind of unity on the continent, to weaken any kind of
absolutely
social individual thriving on the continent, even if they trade with us. So commercially, we are important to them, but it's not in their best interest that Europe gets stronger and more cohesive. So therefore, we've really let our guards down as to intelligence gathering, as to extremist ideologies taking hold. There are so many aspects to it. And I think there's a massive waking up happening, but it takes a lot of time to get our immune system back on track.
Yes, and we have to admit that the US has been pushing us since Obama in this direction more or less forcefully. Already the first Trump administration was outspoken in that, and we didn't really want to listen. My great regret is that we didn't really wake up in 2014. So when the Crimea was annexed, for me that was a shock, and that's when I started to work with disinformation research with my colleagues in think tank.
What is that story? I mean, not the Crimea story, which we know, but the information.
So that was the Center for European Integration and Democracy, and so many of my colleagues also worked on comparative disinformation analysis, how Crimea was presented in the national press from Finland to Bulgaria. and what sort of narratives were developed. There were very particular cases when Russian trolls still wrote different articles about the capabilities of warplanes, so to justify the claims that later their Russian leaders would make in a press conference. So the Sukhoi capabilities have been modified because of the shooting down of the Malaysian airliner. And these are the small things, but you have seen that offline and online activities completely melted and overlapped. So it's not about a single activity that I write a false Wikipedia article. It's that a false article is serving the press release of a Russian leader who is ultimately targeting a German audience, because that audience with a local influence agent will be brought on the streets, and that was the Lisa case, when they really organized protests in more than 10 German cities upon the migration crisis, which went into blood because they also enhanced the other side. And that was the Trump first campaign case book as well, that actually Russian trolls enhanced both sides to go on the street and get into violent action. And so when you see that, and this is so far from our mindset that I believe we really have to understand that, yes, someone can be so evil. But once we understood that, maybe we should act upon that quite quickly, and that was not the case. The Germans did not start really gathering intelligence until 2017, which is 3 years later.
Now, that's exactly the thing. It frustrates me and honestly infuriates me without limit, because hello, good morning, and those signs were there. And I'm interested in many topics, and I follow many different areas. So if I kind of saw that and noticed it, and you were much closer professionally to this, and you saw that.
Everyone knew in the expert community. That was no secret.
And that's the thing. You see, like
I guess the Intel community must have been a couple of years ahead.
There you go. And those in leadership positions, and those whose job was to defend, to protect against an information warfare, and against many of these subtle or not so subtle attacks, they just didn't do their job. And that is an extremely frustrating thing. And even now, well, you already start seeing certain signs that, okay, there's a realization that there's a hybrid warfare, and there is massive pressure against our political systems, and trying to help, be that in Romania, be that in France, be that in other countries, those candidates who are just plainly assets of the Russian intelligence services.
And some of them have been taken off the street by the counterintelligence units, and we still take those parties as credible.
Right. So it's really crazy. Like where is our own protection of our own democracy and of our own political systems against these? I probably I'm underserving just by saying unethical, because it's just a minimum that we can say that they're unethical and immoral, but they're truly disruptive and destructive forces. Yeah. Where's that naivety coming from?
So one of my favorite French thinker is Raymond Aron, and it was not only him, of course, asking this question, but the ultimate question, especially in the Intel community, is, can we protect democracy with undemocratic means? And that, for the US, the answer is quite evident. That how do we call the extrajudicial killings in the Middle East when US drones are killing the local terrorist leaders? There is a nice name to put on it, but practically they are allowed, and they allow themselves to do that. How much can you imagine the German security service or the French one to really act with violence in Russia, which would be our adversary for the last 8 years?
Well, even if it's not specifically geographically in Russia, but just protecting your own territory against that sort of interference, be that with physical assets or through social media or through other means.
And Andras, I guess that in Central Europe we have a historical advantage, maybe special responsibility, because we understand how Russians operate. We understand the mindset, unfortunately, better. And I guess the Polish are really picking up on that. And the Romanians established the NATO Center of Excellence on counterintelligence. So these are things that, we should use this know-how. And the Western member states should also recognize that, yes, there are stuff that these guys in the East know, because the Poles and the Baltics have been crying out since 2014.
Yeah. well, you take the External Action Service, well, they have the FIMI as a definition, the foreign interference and foreign information manipulation and interference. So again, even on relatively high levels of the administrative, political size, and NATO has a similar program and all that. But if, say, one of the member states or more than one of the EU member states, namely be that Hungary, Slovakia, or others, are kind of compromised, what can you do?
Well, I guess that's the question for the couple of coming EU summits, how they would see under the Polish presidency the next debate on the Article 7 regarding Hungary. That's the very applied version. But to put this on a last thought on that, I guess that we are in a very rushed rewriting of our social contracts. Because that has not been clearly said, and I guess we are not teaching in the schools enough about that aspect, that the state had not always had the same responsibilities. The states were not offering hospitals at the end of the 19th century. The church was. The marriage was administered by the church. So many things were not state function. What do we expect of the 21st century state as a citizen? They have to protect us in the cyberspace. What does that mean? Do they have to protect us against disinformation? Physically, proxy, whatever, great firewall, or just by education? Space, fifth domain of war, or fourth domains of war, and then the cyberspace, officially recognized. Europe is lagging behind, but thanks God, the Germans are starting to catch up, and other companies as well. So we really have to think about what do we expect realistically of the state, and these statesmen should then act upon that to really protect us where we need to be protected, and to let people in a subsidiary way do what they can anyway do. Maybe in some old, decade-long aspects, we don't need any more the state intervention.
I think that's essentially the core question, and what I truly appreciate in your perspective and everything we talked about, that you try to look at the deeper layers and say, okay, what is the root of a problem or root of a phenomenon from which all the other things originate?
And spread out, yeah. That's the intellectual.
That's a great thing. Now, before we finish, I have a new ritual that I want to introduce, which I received this wonderful gift. Which is 100 questions.
Wow.
So I'll ceremonially reveal this, and up to you to pick a question, please.
I believed you prepared for me the upper chord.
Yeah, okay, well, I think, sorry, I need to turn it this way, so it's completely unknown what is on the other side. And then we will have you answer that question right on the spot.
Wow.
Please.
I'm not sure if that's fair. Let's see. Okay. Let's see if I'm lucky.
Let's see how difficult that question is.
So the question says, what would you like to tell someone who is no longer alive? Oh, wow. That's touchy. I just lost my father 3 months ago. So I officially became orphan, as I lost my mom longer ago. That's tough. I also had a very close relationship with my grandfather, with whom we lived together in the same flat for more than 10 years, in a 3-generational flat. And I guess that's something we again should really reinstate if we are in the privileged position to be able to do that. I remember my last discussion with my mom. And at that time, I was frustrated because there was nothing extraordinary in it. And looking back, I guess that was the extraordinary, that we could have a normal conversation. And now I would, really recognize that in her, that even in the last moment when we met, it was, not casual because we knew, but still really human. And she could keep this humanity all along. And actually, the last conversation with my fathers were also in this direction, despite his Alzheimer being developed more and more. So I would just, like to go to the buffet of the hospital with them and have a coffee and just have a human conversation. One more.
I think there is tremendous value in humanity, in everyday experiences. It doesn't need to be extraordinary to be extraordinary.
Yes, the encounter. The encounter and the value of a simple encounter.
So with that, thank you so much for the conversation. As a final note, those who want to follow your work or read about what you write,
So
where
yeah,
can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn in English, and I do my work as analyst with Partizan Media. That's a Hungarian outlet, podcast, videos, and a newsletter, a weekly newsletter. So that's in Hungarian. But
So for the Hungarian viewers of this show, they'll do it. But we'll put that into the show notes and put the proper links.
Thank you.
And also for the leadership program
Oh yes,
of the Jesuits, we'll be happy to link to it for those who are interested or
Thank
who know
you.
someone who are interested.
We are looking for applications every semester, so that will be great help. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Andras.